Significant severe weather is expected today across the United States, where we could see the potential for significant damaging winds, large hail, and the potential for a few tornadoes, and a strong tornado or two are also going to be a possibility later today, and a tornado outbreak cannot be ruled out. So in today's forecast, we're going to break down exactly what you need to know about the severe weather potential in the United States for both today and tomorrow. Let's begin with what's going to be happening today, which is Wacky Weather Wednesday. The Storm Prediction Center has grown the risk for severe weather across a large chunk of the United States. This goes from the Midwest all the way back over into central Texas. This is where we could see some isolated large hail, damaging winds, and even a tornado or two later this afternoon and into the evening hours. Where our greatest concentration of severe weather will be today is anywhere from North Texas back into southern Iowa. This entire slight risk region in the yellow has a more elevated chance for large hail and damaging winds, and also the potential for a few tornadoes. But the area that we are the most concerned about today will be the Kansas City metro, Wichita, Kansas, and as well as back through a far northern extreme part of Oklahoma. This is an area that we think that there is a potential for strong tornadoes. In this area, you need to make sure that you have a tornado action plan ready to go and multiple ways to receive alerts. We are going to be live covering this later today here on YouTube, so make sure you are subscribed down below. Now, the main concerns for today will be damaging winds and large hail. Notice that red area. That is indicating that we have the potential for numerous damaging winds from Kansas City back into northern Oklahoma. So hatch down trampolines. If you have any loose lawn items outside, make sure that you're bringing those inside, because there will be a potential for damaging winds ranging from 60 to 75 miles per hour. Even outside of this, there will be a potential for isolated to scattered damaging winds anywhere from the Chicago area back into parts of central Texas. Now, the tornado threat is going to be one of our greater concerns for today, as the Storm Prediction Center has outlined a hatched risk for tornadoes. What that essentially means is that a strong tornado or two will be possible from Kansas City back into northern Oklahoma. Now, this means that an EF2 plus tornado is a possibility today. That is what a strong tornado is. But outside of this area, we still need to watch for the potential for a tornado or two. Look how large this tornado risk is today. Anywhere in that green does represent at least a low chance to see a tornado or two, and that goes anywhere from the Chicago suburbs back into north central Texas. It's a very large area, so make sure you have a tornado action plan in place if you're anywhere in this area today, and have multiple ways to receive alerts. Today's severe weather setup is very reminiscent to something that we would see in May, where we have a strong southwesterly flow in the mid-levels and also a negatively tilted shortwave trough, which is essentially going to lead to more rotating supercells, and stronger mid-level winds will also help to pick up wind shear more. And combine that with the different wind profiles across the atmosphere, with winds coming out of different directions, that's going to lead to the potential for rotating supercells later this afternoon and into the evening hours, and we even could see that go all the way into the overnight hours. But notice that this will not really pick up until later this afternoon. I honestly think today's tornado threat is going to be more geared towards the late afternoon into the evening hours, and could even extend into the overnight hours as this will eventually turn into a line of storms and continue to push east into areas like Missouri, Arkansas, and even into parts of Illinois. One key factor to today's severe weather setup is exactly where our triple point sets up. That's essentially where we have our low pressure system along with our cold frontal boundary, and as well as our dry line. And when these all three basically meet up at one point, that is the area that we think that the greatest wind shear will be available. So I do think our greatest tornado threat will be in northern Oklahoma and central and southern parts of Kansas, and that could even extend back up closer to Kansas City as we go into the late afternoon and evening hours. Now, the tornado threat gets interesting as we go into the evening hours. This threat is not done. I think this is going to be a multi-hour type threat. However, I think that when this area of storms becomes more linear, we're talking more about embedded tornadoes in a line of thunderstorms. However, if there are any discrete supercells left around the mid to late evening hours, we could see another tornado or two, even in eastern Oklahoma. Now, with all that said, there's a lot of buoyancy, a lot of moisture out there, so this setup overall is very favorable today for severe weather. With all that said, the tornado threat for today is expected to be more elevated than what we usually deal with around this time of the year. We are looking at tornado parameter values even by the mid-afternoon hours increasing across eastern Kansas, but I think the peak of this tornado threat will probably happen around 7 o'clock or so tonight. Notice how this area is going to become very compact, and that's where I expect the greatest tornado threat to really reside, especially across northern Oklahoma and back into southeastern Kansas. But we could even see another tornado threat materialize back over in eastern Oklahoma tonight if storms are able to continue to stay discreet. Even if they don't, and this is more of a linear setup, I still think embedded tornadoes in a line of thunderstorms is possible. Outside of this area, we could still see a tornado or two, even as far south as Texas, maybe as far north as Wisconsin. But overall, the parameter values are much lower, and the wind shear is not nearly as impressive. I think any of those areas would be dealing with a much more isolated threat of a tornado or two. And then as we go into the overnight hours, there will still be a continuation, I think, of at least another tornado or two from Missouri back into northeast Texas. And again, I do think that this is going to be a long day ahead, especially during the nighttime, though. So make sure that you have multiple ways to receive alerts. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel as well, because we do plan on going live for this later today. Now let's time this out for you on the future radar, and we're going to go north to south, beginning with the Midwest, which will stay dry for the morning. By the early afternoon hours, storms are going to start to ramp up across Nebraska and Iowa. These should be mostly elevated, so I think the main concern will be damaging winds and isolated hail. As we go into the mid to late afternoon hours, this continues to organize more into a line of thunderstorms, and once that happens, the severe weather threat will start to pick up. So that should pick up more closer to 4 to 5 o'clock, right around rush hour. Eventually by 6 to 7, this line continues to push to the east towards areas like Wisconsin, eventually going towards Illinois, eastern Iowa, and also northwestern Missouri, where the main concern again will be damaging winds. Can't rule out an embedded tornado or two in this line, but I don't really think we're going to have much of a tornado threat in the Midwest today. And then by the overnight hours, these storms will be approaching areas like Chicago, central Illinois, and then back into eastern Missouri, where damaging winds will still be a possibility, maybe a brief tornado through Thursday morning. And then by Thursday afternoon, we'll still have a low chance for a couple of damaging wind events, maybe in Indiana and maybe southwestern Ohio. But this thing starts to fizzle, and unfortunately for Ohio and West Virginia, you are not going to be seeing much rain out of this. And those areas are right now in the highest drought category they could possibly have. They desperately need rainfall over there. So hopefully this actually gets over to Ohio and West Virginia with some beneficial rainfall. Back over in the Central Plains, this is going to be the main story for today. We'll be watching for elevated thunderstorms to fire off around 11 a.m., maybe 12 p.m., so right around lunchtime. Eventually by the afternoon hours, that continues to move northeast. Can't rule out an isolated tornado through about 3 o'clock in northeastern Kansas or southeastern Nebraska. I think our greater concern, though, is really going to ramp up around 4 to 5 o'clock here. We're going to be watching for a line of thunderstorms to develop, but any storms out in front of that line will have a better shot at producing a tornado. So any prefrontal convection would have the best shot at producing a tornado threat. Lots of rotating storms moving towards Kansas City right around 6. Even in northern parts of Oklahoma, storms will be really getting going there. And eventually by 7 to 8 o'clock, those storms are moving through Kansas City. We'll have some convection developing in Oklahoma. Any storms there will be mostly hail and wind producers, but again, tornado threat definitely does exist. And then as we go late into the evening and into the overnight hours, this eventually becomes a elongated line of thunderstorms with mostly a wind threat, but QLCS tornadoes will be a possibility. So have a tornado action plan ready to go even into the overnight hours, and eventually by Thursday morning, we are done talking about this particular storm system. And then back over in the Southern Plains, mainly talking about Texas and southern Oklahoma, this area is a very conditional risk for severe weather today, meaning that you may or may not see significant severe weather. It's really going to depend on if the cap can be overcome in the late afternoon and evening hours. Now, this particular model does not show any convection developing until around midnight or so. If that happens, this should be mostly just a wind threat, isolated hail, maybe a brief spin up. But if storms are able to fire off earlier than that and they're discrete, that'll be a more concerning feature. So we have to watch that closely, but I think the chances of that happening are low. For the most part, mostly just going to be talking about damaging winds here in the Southern Plains. And then as we go into Thursday afternoon, maybe another isolated threat for damaging winds and maybe a brief tornado in the lower Mississippi Valley. I do want to point out one small feature as well for today. I wouldn't rule out an isolated tornado here right along the Louisiana and Texas border during the early afternoon. We are going to have some convection going south to north, and there will be a little bit of wind shear down there, so just something to keep a close eye on if you're in those areas. Now, as we go into the next few days, things are going to continue to stay very active. This is not the only storm system we are going to have here to end October and going into November. Instead, we are going to have more storm systems. By the weekend, another large-scale trough is expected to develop in the central and southern plains, and that should bring multiple rounds of severe storms, especially on Monday to areas like Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, where more significant severe weather is possible, and I'm definitely not ruling out a severe weather outbreak early next week. That also could bring some snowfall, but that remains uncertain. And then after that, by the tail end of the week and into the weekend, we are likely to see at least maybe 1 or 2 more storms that enter the country as we get closer to the middle of November. So stay weather aware, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We'll keep you posted with the latest on everything that you need to know about the second severe weather season. And this is your last chance to pick up 500,000 subscriber merch on shopmaxvelocity.net. That is the top link in the description below. This is available until tomorrow night. You can get the 500K hat, t-shirt, sticker, mug, or even the beanie at shopmaxvelocity.net. Top link in the description below.